Welcome back to our Prisma Cloud Native Security Summit, the state of cloud native security, brought to you by Prisma Cloud by Palo Alto Networks. Our guest speaker today is Chenxi Wang, joining us to talk about third-party security and the current trends in the remote world. Chenxi is the managing general partner at Rain Capital. Chenxi, glad to see you today.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me.
So let's have a conversation about third-party source security, but I've been reading a bit about, how hackers like to work. And one of the things I learned about in reading about these hacking exploits in Texas, a number of these municipalities were hacked. And these municipalities really were caught by surprise, clearly. But the hackers were very studious. They studied the systems and the processes that were publicly available. They knew about the people. They really did what we often hear when we are discussing social engineering. Mm-hmm. And so my question really for you is, these hackers are students who really research their prey, so to speak, to find vulnerabilities. What are these hackers studying in the cloud native community?
Well, as hackers go, right, they, as you said, some of them are very studious. So what that means is they take it as a research project to gather as much information as they can about the subject, the opponent, if you will, and not only gather information, but analyze it, right? And then some of them will form a strategy even as opposed to just poke it around like a blind target. In the cloud native world, what we're seeing is a ton of people are hitting APIs, right? So if the cloud platform has published APIs, not only your business partners, your customers are using those APIs, a ton of API scanning is happening. They're trying out keys to see if a default key is attached to an API. And those are all hacking activities. So they're using the cloud native interface, if you will, to understand how to interact with certain cloud services, how to log in, and after you log in, what kind of things can you pull out as data as logs. So essentially using the native interface to do its reconnaissance and social engineering tasks, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So they're definitely studying the APIs, and APIs were one of the first topics I really explored as an enterprise technology reporter. After the APIs came container technologies, and we saw the rise of, for instance, the Go programming language and newer cloud native approaches. Mm-hmm. And they weren't really of interest to hackers, and now they certainly are. Where would you say we are in that maturity cycle in terms of the interest of online hackers into cloud native technologies?
So hacking, it really follows the money. There have been cases where hacking is politically motivated, and that's still happening as well. But by and large, hacking follows the trail of money. And if you see the new Verizon data breach investigation report which is just released yesterday, I think the statistics is 80% of data breaches, over 80% are financially motivated today. This is for the last 12 months of investigation. So really is being financially motivated. They want to hit places and systems where it has the most valuable data. Right. And now as more and more applications and workloads are moving to the cloud, you have more customer data, you have more critical functions exist in the cloud, and naturally more hackers will move to the cloud as a target. And it wasn't like this before because the cloud just wasn't that attractive a target. And now it is.
Now it is. And the money's there, clearly.
Yep.
The amount of venture investment, for instance, is considerable. So how smart are the IT and devs about the hackers who are studying them? Where are they in terms of their education level? Because, like, I remember a few years, like 5 years ago, I'm like, there should be like a great kind of story or documentary about what little interest there was in security. Like, it was so I was thinking, like, you could go to a place like South by Southwest and talk to all the people there and they'd be like, what are you talking about security? And I think there are probably similar kind of like points of view in developer communities too. Yeah. How are they now? Are they the same way? Are they more studious? What are some of your examples?
What are your guesses?
Good question.
Do you think they're more interested in security, less interested, or about the same?
I don't think it's their favorite topic. I would say probably it's like, down the list of topics they really want to talk about. I would say that, but when you start talking about continuous delivery in context with security, then their eyes light up to some extent. And then when you start talking about APIs, then they get more interested. When you start talking about containers, they get more interested. But I think the reality is that a lot of them probably are only using scanning tools if their organizations require it, for instance. I don't think it's changed a lot.
And you're absolutely right. On the grand schema of things for IT and dev, it hasn't changed much. There are certain organizations that are more aware and more conscientious about their practices and the tools and utilities they're using. But by and large, I think IT and dev in general, outside of IT security, is still fairly nascent in their thought process about embedding security into their workflows. I remember in 2010, I gave a talk in New York City to a room full of financial services, InfoSec people. And that was, 2010, I think. And one person raised his hand and said, you know what the problem with InfoSec is? And I said, tell me. and he said, the problem is we don't have more breaches. We need more breaches. And I think that was not too long after TJIX had a breach. And he said, we need more TJIX. Because I can't get my executive to pay attention to me, to give me more budget, and I can't operate. And he's absolutely right at that time. Now, I think there are more breaches now in the headline, right? Like Target and Equifax and everything. But when you talk about actual execution, right? Everybody read about those headlines, but translating that to the work they do day to day, I think there's still a gap. And so which means as security industry professionals, and myself included, we need to reach out more with the adjacent community, and especially with dev these days. I mean, software is eating the world, and dev is the one drives software. So guess what? We need to work with dev to make it happen.
That leads to me some questions about yourself. And, you're pretty savvy about software development, and you have a background in writing and researching about information security. I'd like to ask you first about information security and what's your interest in it. And then based upon that, what makes it fun now that it's intersecting with DevOps?
So I fell into InfoSec purely by accident because I was looking for projects to do in grad school, and a applied crypto project came up, and I was interested in math and good at math, and I thought I could do something with it, and so I just ran with it and ended up doing that as my master's project, and then did a application security project, a large project, my PhD thesis. And that's when I really got into software security and later on, so the more general security, IT security and InfoSec. What I liked about...
If I can interrupt quickly, can I interrupt quickly?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what your degrees, what degrees you have?
So I have a PhD in computer science from the University of Virginia. And my thesis was on code obfuscation. The idea is run trusted software in an untrustworthy environment. So we were doing all kinds of obfuscation things to make sure it executes as it intended to. And I wrote the whole compiler for my PhD thesis. So
Wow.
I would say I have a fairly deep understanding of how software works and how the whole, going from dev to compilation to object code and to deployment. So that's how I got into it. The reason I like it is it's never dull. This is an industry that every year there are new attacks, new systems, and new methods of hacking, and you kind of learn these new things. Like, you and I got to know each other because containers, right? So I remember 2015, actually 2014, I started to notice Docker. And as a security person, to understand a new virtualization technology, the first question I asked is, who's securing it? What's the security aspect of it? And that got me into it. And that got me started with TrustLock and a few other places. And that's how we got to know each other, right? So not only there are new hacking methods, every time a new infrastructure comes onto the scene, there are new security requirements and sort of methods that you need to study. And I always like to do new things, so that's why I like it. And one more thing, I think security is unique in that it does have an altruistic aspect to it, right? So we are protecting consumer data, we're protecting consumer financial data, and on the other end of the wires, consumers are 80-year-old guys who have these bank accounts that getting hacked. So I like that aspect of being able to provide protection to individual consumers and users.
So there is an altruistic aspect to it, which makes it interesting. So we are seeing now an increase in these third-party security tools. TwistLock was a startup, and now it's part of Prisma at Palo Alto Networks. And there's several others out there that have matured and either been acquired or doing very well themselves.
Yeah.
So what are the ones you like out there? What are some of the categories that are of interest to you? And, in that respect, how do you make sense of them?
Ooh, making sense of them is hard.
Yeah.
There's so many of them, right? And so when you say third party are the ones that independent of the cloud providers, right? So certainly Amazon, Google, Azure all have their own security tools at some level. And then you've got the third party ones. Palo Alto is certainly has a suite of them under the Prisma brand, and there are a few others as well. The interesting thing to me from looking at comparison between native security tools and independent, obviously the one obvious thing is it's multi-cloud, right? So the independent one can go across from Azure to AWS to GCP. And since large enterprise today don't put their stuff in just one cloud, because you want a diversification, and hence a independent tool gives you the sort of a control plane where you can look across different cloud. That's a plus. The other thing is the native security tools, even though they built on the premise that they have deep access to cloud data because they are built by the cloud provider. But they have a specific way of manifesting that data to you, right? And if they don't manifest to you, you just don't have access. Now, the third-party tools, even though in some levels, they're also under that constraint, they work with the cloud provider, the cloud platform via partner APIs. Right? Some APIs will give them fairly good access to data where they can then process within their product and manifest that to you. And I've seen this over and over again where third-party tools actually give you more visibility, deeper access to certain logs and data than the native tools, because the native tools just didn't quite get there yet, or they didn't view this as important. And that's actually an interesting distinction is the cloud provider security is never their number one money-making thing, right? It's there because they have to do it to sell their main services. For the third-party tool, that is their business. So they invest in innovation, in keeping up with the latest threats. The cloud providers may or may not do that, or may do that as quickly or effectively. So that also impacts the efficacy of the solution.
That's correct. So I was going to ask about cloud services, and so if you're just depending on cloud services, you should be really looking at, what are their security what's their security posture, and so when you're looking at the work that's needed to be done with third-party tools. What do you see as gaps in the software lifecycle development?
Gaps
in the software lifecycle.
Gaps for the third-party tools or gaps for the software development lifecycle?
Let's look at both. So maybe first start with the cloud services, then we can look at the third-party tools.
Cloud service as a platform to develop your software on top?
Yeah.
The gaps, let me see. So the one thing that everybody complains about is not being able to access all the logs at the time they needed, or at the format, at certain format they needed. So in AWS, for instance, it's quite complicated to process all these different log sources. And they came out with for instance, for security, Security Hub is one that aggregates the different sources of logs, but that still is fairly nascent, I think, in terms of its functionality. And I can't tell you how many IT security professionals have been telling me they're drowning in those cloud logs, and they need something to help them to aggregate it, to make sense of it, to analyze it, and to visualize it. And I think that's one gap that the cloud service providers are not providing today. Another thing is, so everybody has their own CI/CD tools, right? So they have their own CI/CD tool chains, and they have maybe Jira and maybe something else for ticketing and others. Now, the cloud service provider don't necessarily give you all the integration you need with all the set of tools that you already have. So you have to live with whatever integration they offer you. And that's, again, a gap.
Okay, those are two good ones. And so, where do you see the third-party tool gaps? So, one thing we hear is prioritization, for instance. It's hard to prioritize vulnerabilities. Yep. Another critique I hear is about, telling you that you have a vulnerability, but not really helping you do anything about it, right? So you might have like a whole database of vulnerabilities, and actually the question is, how many of them are you actually resolving? So I'm curious on what are some of the third-party tool deficiencies you're seeing out there?
So prioritization remains a difficult proposition because a third-party tool cannot help you prioritize independent of your context, right? So the third-party tool doesn't know your application is sitting behind a firewall, for instance, right? It's going to scan your application and tell you, oh, you've got, let's say, 5 remote execution vulnerability. But they don't know 2 of them are from an application that's sitting behind a firewall that may not have the remote execution access. So they will report that as critical, yet the developers or somebody who understands the system architecture will triage this and say, hey, those are not relevant for us, and we just wasted time triaging these vulnerabilities. So a good prioritization mechanism absolutely has to understand your environment, the system makeup, in order to give you the right reading. And that's just hard to begin with.
Yeah.
Right. And so the third party tool has to be able to integrate with other things in your environment to figure out, to get this comprehensive view in order to help you prioritize. And I just don't see that happening in terms of automation that easily.
That's interesting, the comprehensive view. And so it almost like seems like, I'm going to get into another question, but I just want to preface it by kind of summing it up by saying there almost seems to be like a problem with the number of tools out there in some respects, that there's such a kind of a variety of tools they're kind of on the market. And you really got to know, what are the kind of the differences between these tools, but not just that, but, what are your deepest deficiencies? But it seems like that there's a consolidation that might be helpful for customers to think about when they're looking at the tools, just so they can focus on kind of some core capabilities.
Well, certainly. I mean, third-party security tools develop in their own vacuum, so to speak, right? In the sense of with their own view of the world.
Yeah, right.
And they come to your environment and they have to say, oh, now I have to integrate with your SIM, which could be something that this product wasn't developed with. Or now I have to integrate with your endpoint security product, which wasn't something that they had developed the product with. So then they have to customize it for you, or you have to do it customization. Now, if there's consolidation, which means that someone brings you a broad platform that covers many different essential functions in your cloud security workflow, then you don't have to do those low-level integration yourself. You can just say, okay, within the product, it's natively integrated, so I trust the right data is getting to the right aspect of the function. So that obviously saves time and effort. So it's obviously a good thing. Now, the trick is, are all these different functions within the platform some of the best that you can have, right? So, I mean, that's a classic debate. But I think consolidation is needed. Consolidation is happening and will continue to happen because customers demand it.
Yeah. The attack surfaces have changed considerably now. We have, a whole new set of configuration issues to think through. There's network overlay issues. There's all these issues to consider in Kubernetes. A lot of things, in terms of the defaults have been resolved, and people are updating their Kubernetes versions better than they used to. Mm-hmm. And cloud services are pretty good with managing Kubernetes, but there's a lot of other issues that users should be thinking about with third-party tools that work on cloud services. So how are the concerns different than with the on-premise installations? And, are there, and what, if you're using both, because, our premise at the new stack is, it's not about the enterprise. It's not about the cloud. It's about services and software on, fast distributed infrastructure. And so what are the things that you're thinking about when you're looking out at the market with things that you think, are applicable to those users, and what should they make sense of?
As in, thinking
the
about
differences between, these extensive attack surfaces that they face, and when they're adopting Kubernetes, when they what should they be thinking about those third-party tools that can work on both environments, really? Because if scale is truly just, it's not just the cloud. Clearly cloud is a way that people do scale out, but there's lots of other considerations too about how you think about scale, right? And how you think about it both from an internal and an external point of view. Is it multiple suites of different tools? Is it, I'm just kind of getting into the head of the user out there who's thinking about, wow, gosh, I hear all this stuff about multi-cloud, right? And how do I make sense of multi-cloud and like security?
I can tell you what, from a user standpoint, which is how I always look at a problem, right? From a user standpoint, so number one, if you're a small company, you might as well just put everything in the cloud, in one cloud, because it's too complicated to deal with. But if you're a large company, I'm aware of several large companies like have a directive that they cannot just work with one cloud provider. So they have to put certain applications in some cloud, or may even back up to another cloud, or other applications in different clouds to balance it out. And when that happens from a security standpoint, do you want to go and separately configure these different clouds? You can, but do you really want to do that? No. Ideally, what you want to do is you bring in a third-party vendor. You say, hey, vendor, no, here's my enterprise security policy. And hopefully you have them nicely documented. And you hand them over to the vendor, say, hey, go and translate that to all the cloud environments that I do business with today, and make sure that whatever their configurations and policies settings are consistent with my requirements, right? So I don't have to do the translation myself. You do it for me. And if they have that automation built in, that engine that can translate your policy into the specific settings to the cloud, then great. That is one thing that absolutely critically needed, right? And so that's one. And then during operations, I want monitoring, I want collecting data, I want to respond to incidents and all that. Again, it should be a sort of meta level managed function across different clouds. And you can debate about whether that function needs to live in the cloud platform itself, or could be outside of it, just looking at aggregation of data. Those are, I think, implementation details. But what you want is one layer of control to go across different clouds.
One layer of control. I like that. And that then makes you think of Kubernetes for sure. As an infrastructure. So, because it can be something you can deploy across, different environments.
Yeah, it certainly is because it's platform neutral, right? So you can deploy it on premises and in different clouds.
Okay, so let's play a little game here, okay? So I'm going to give you my 3 trends that I'm seeing in the cloud security tool market. And I want to know if you agree or disagree, and what your 3 are. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So number one, one is identity and the issue of personas. Number 2 is configurations, and number 3 is culture. And I'm thinking, engineering management. What am I playing it safe here? Am I on? Okay. Am I off? Where are you?
You have to be more controversial than that. You can't just say identity. You have to tell me a statement about identity for me to agree or disagree with you.
So identity, I'm thinking like of all the multiple personas out there, and like people don't have any. And so there's a lot of like, it's like, wait a second, I'm the network engineer here. I manage this. A developer doesn't manage that. Developer's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Wait a second, I need a network engineer. So that gets into like the persona issue. That also then leads to the configuration issue. It's like, wait a second, can I just use YAML here? Just a little simple. I know it's sloppy and everything else, but can I just do that? And then the third issue is like engineering management. It gets into the cultural thing. It's like, wait a second, no one knows what they're doing here. We don't have any kind of like, everyone's kind of off doing their own thing. There's this, there's this culture here of just like, kind of like, just get it done.
Yeah.
We got to think through this a little bit better. What are the best engineering practices? And I think we're seeing software kind of emerge in that respect too.
So, I can tell you that sure, multiple personas exist, right? They exist on premises as well, and they continue to exist in the cloud. But the trend that I am seeing is that there's blurring distinctions between the multiple personas because things need to move faster. So the dev may be taking on ops roles, and also the dev may be taking on networking management roles, manager roles, because software stack is the full stack needs to manage certain parts of the networking operation as well, right? And it just cannot be I put in a request for my network manager to change the configuration on the firewall, and a week later he changes it, then I can do my thing. It just doesn't work. So the firewall in the cloud needs to have APIs for dev to manipulate. Now, is dev, is dev network ops? It's really blurring, right? So that's the trend. So if you say that, I would agree with you.
Okay.
And the second one is configuration, right? So, what about configuration? What is your statement about configuration?
See, like I'm playing it safe here, and I'm like, I'm being a journalistic observer. I'm like thinking of like, let's talk about cloud native projects, for instance, right? And like, let's think about, integrating, network overlays, for instance, or thinking through how you integrate role-based access control, but that would be more of an identity issue. So
I'll tell you what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
With configuration, right? So I'm seeing configuration as part of an automation workflow, right? So it's no longer, and I'm also seeing configuration as a coding, as a configuration as code, right? So it's no longer, someone type in something and set in stone for a long time, like a network firewall configuration. It is, I want to change this one thing. There is a script that allows me to change, and it does all the downstream change for me in the same time. So it's automation. It's about configuration as code. So what that means is really software being a dynamic, sort of the dynamic nature of software is permeating to infrastructure. It's not just about application. It's about the aspects that manages the application, runs the application, monitors application. So in that regard, configuration is becoming code. Okay,
cool. Okay, my last one was engineering management. And so one of the things I am seeing out there is companies that have, people who have worked for companies that have really scaled out their architectures, right? And so they're starting to build like software that allows, for instance, to really kind of integrate these practices into organizations. And so it's almost like engineering management, as code. And so that's kind of the third issue that I would see, because then you could build that automation into the actual engineering management practices themselves.
Yeah, I think that is definitely happening in some of the more sophisticated shops, though we're still, I think, years away from that becoming a common practice.
Okay, so that's not, so that was not on the cusp. Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite on the cusp yet.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad I'm a little bit ahead of the game. So So I want to change the conversation to a topic that I don't know a lot about, and I thought it'd be fun kind of time to just explore this at the end of our discussion here. And so I'm curious about cybersecurity. I don't really, it's discussed so much, but I'm interested in the intersection of cloud native security and cybersecurity. And do they meet? Do they not meet? Perhaps you could help me out, kind of better understand your perspective on cybersecurity in the enterprise, and with the rise of application development and practices that, that embrace continuous delivery. What is the intersection there?
Yeah. So certainly they intersect, right? So whether your application is in a traditional infrastructure or in the cloud, you're still defending against threats. You still want to detect breaches and protect your data. So those things haven't changed. What changed is the way you go about it. So for instance, in the old ways, and it was 2020, we're still talking about the old ways, but there's still a lot of companies still running on that method, right? So you've got securities sold as boxes, right? So you've got this box of firewall, this box of, IPS, right? So these physical boxes have a certain volume of traffic they can handle because they're physical boxes, right? They can't magically grow another wing. And in the cloud, guess what? Things, as you know well, Alex, things go up and down, skating up and down all the time, right? You can't put a physical box in today, say, oh, this is 2x of what I expect to see and it'll be good. But tomorrow you might be looking at 20x. What do? You just run to put another box? You can't do that, right? So, and that's security, right? So for security, the old box mentality, to translate that into cloud native just doesn't work. So security, what that means is security products, security, and we're not even talking about products, security functionality, that the security technology has to be itself cloud native. So it has to be horizontally scalable, right? It has to be API centric. So can be very easily integrated with other control platforms, a control functionality that you need to complete a workflow, for instance.
But now it's more about function.
Yes. Well, yes, it's always about function. It's just how the function manifests itself, right? And so I think the API centric, natively scalable, horizontally scalable are some of the table stakes for security products. And so, and also the thing about APIs is many security products today, you don't actually need a console. People don't want your console. People want your data. And hence a set of APIs allow another control panel to pull data out and act upon the data in real time is super powerful. It's a lot more powerful than you put up your own console. And so those are change of mindset and change of deployment model. And another thing I think it's super for security technologists and engineers and product people to understand is in the old days, security products are built for security people, for security ops, for InfoSec. And they have a certain way of looking at the world. But today, as we said earlier, the personas are merging, right? Today, lots of security products have to be built for other roles. You have to build your product for dev and understand how devs see the world. And you have to build your product for the SREs, understand how they want to see data, see how they view visibility and how they respond to things. And that is super, super critical to security products and technology going forward.
So, and that will then help your cybersecurity posture then.
How the, well,
so that, you know, so having kind of having those better defined then helps your cybersecurity posture. Or
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, so when I'll tell you this, application security tools, if they are hated by dev, they're just not going to be deployed.
Yeah.
right. So, and I'll tell you that the number of application security tools not hated by dev is like small. and so when you have one, everybody's like, whoa, that's great. And so I'll tell you a story that the other day I heard about a code scanning tool was deployed because one single thing that you can actually authenticate through this tool to a new kind of cloud system. Every other tool that just doesn't matter how deep they claim their analysis is, they don't allow you to authenticate to this tool, and there's users like, nah, can't use it. So understand your user population, understand their requirement, and be agile about where the market is moving in terms of user base is what's required.
That's great. So open source, it has to really be a player here, doesn't it? It really has to be. Yeah. And then the third-party tools that integrate open source really have to really be up to that kind of acceptance level for developers.
Yes. And open source tools are easy to manipulate and a lot of developers like it. But for enterprise security to do enterprise security tasks, they often lack certain, they don't give you the way to analyze data or to integrate with other tools easily. So you have to build that. So there is a place, I think, in InfoSec for someone to step in and say, okay, I'm going to come manage your open source security tools or open source tools and that has security implications and give you that enterprise layer of control on top of those tools.
Chenxi, I have so enjoyed this conversation with you as usual. You brought your game, and it's so much fun to talk to you on these topics because you're so knowledgeable and you are doing you've done a lot of great work for this community. So I always want to thank you for that and wishing you continued success in your venture capital efforts. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So thanks again for joining us, and mark your calendars and join us for the main virtual event on June 24th, where we will take a deep dive into the state of cloud native security, the market survey findings that were done, and chat with cloud native security experts from Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Accenture, Red Hat, HashiCorp, Datadog, and more. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. Prisma by Palo Alto Networks is the sponsor of this episode of the New Stack Makers. Governed access plus pervasive protection for data, apps, hosts, containers, and serverless. This is the proper foundation for the journey to the cloud. Prisma, the industry's most complete cloud security suite, helps customers accelerate their journey with risk visibility and consistent security.